In my last video, we left off here. This is on Grand River across the street from Sperry's, or the old Sperry's store. And we were looking at the Majestic Theater, but we didn't quite have time to get into it in our last video, so we'll do it in this video. Majestic Theater was just about where this parking area is here at the Majestic Building. Of course, the Majestic Building also had a few retail establishments in it too. So before we look at the Majestic Theater, let's look at some of the neighbors that were around the Majestic Theater. Let's go down here a little ways. Right here, this was Carl's watch and clock shop. At least part of it was, and the other part was Ernie's and Bert's barber shop. I know, Ernie, Bert, Bert and Ernie. Well, this was way before Sesame Street. Right next, where this sidewalk is going to, right next to this building here. This sidewalk was once an alley that ran behind the stores that were on the 200 block of Huron Avenue on the west side. Today as a sidewalk, but the building, the Majestic Building, actually started right about here. So there was this long, dreary alleyway that went in between them. And then here, the Majestic Building stood. Now on the west side of the building, there was several businesses. The one I remember being right next to the theater entrance was Doodle's Shoes. The best dressed men in Port Huron wear Winthrop shoes. Next door to Doodle's was one of my favorite places to shop, Bell's Hobby Shop. They had everything I was interested in, model cars, model planes, model trains. I loved it there. Even as an adult, I went back when I was interested in model train layouts and so forth, and I was looking at a book, an electrical book, and I was really interested in it, but I thought it was a little pricey, so I didn't buy it. I did buy something else that day, and he gave me my change back, and it wasn't until I got home that I realized he gave me $20 too much. So I went back the next day, and I told him what happened. I gave him the $20 back, and he says, "Hey," he says, "I know you're looking at this book. I want you to have it on me." Warren Minnick was a nice guy. He was also quite the entrepreneur. He had other things besides novelties and models. He sold cameras as well. And when he heard a movie star was coming to Port Huron, he got in on the ground floor, and he set up a photo shoot in his place of business for amateur photographers to take pictures of this movie star. Her name was Ruth Hampton. She wasn't one of the A actresses, but she was certainly an up-and-coming B actress. Next to Bell's Hobby Shop was the Central Card Shop. Later on, it would be on Quay Street. Next to that, there was a restaurant that was there longer than any of the other businesses other than the theater, and that was Port Huron Barbecue. It was there in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. I remember once in a while my mom would get a hankering for some barbecue, and my dad would go down there and bring some barbecue back for her. Here's a photograph of the inside of the Port Huron Barbecue, if you recognize these ladies. And here's the caption. That was the last business that was in the Majestic Building. But there was another building, a much smaller building, sitting right next to it, and that building was occupied by a restaurant that went under different names over the years. It went by Dutch's Hamburger, George's Hamburgers, and Rocco's Place. But I remember this as Sam and Joe's. I was surprised I couldn't find anything on Sam and Joe's, but I know they were there because they're in the directory, and I also have photographic proof. Not the kind that they would want probably, but still photographic proof. This was taken when there was a fire at the Port Huron Barbecue, and in this photograph you can see Sam and Joe's quite distinctly. and I'll let you read the caption. All right, let's get back to the theater. In this photograph here, you can see the Majestic Theater, and you zoom in here, you can see a couple signs a little bit further down. You can hardly read them, but the first sign says barbecue, and I can't quite make out what the second one says, but one of the restaurants that was there at the time. In this photograph, taken in 1946 at a Blue Water Festival parade, if you look into the background on the left-hand side, you can see the Majestic Theater quite clearly. And while we're here, let's just take a look at the people copying out on the balcony at Sperry's and in the windows. And as we zoom back out, the float that they're looking at the present time, this is a ship that portrays the SS Sperry. The Majestic Theater was opened in 1906 to compete with the City Opera House. This would have been after the Harder Opera House and the Bijou closed. And compete it did. For one thing, it was larger, seating 1,500 people, including the seating in 3 box seats on each side of the auditorium. An article in the Huron Times complained, though, however, that the wooden auditorium seats were hard and hardly befitting a theater that was otherwise handsomely appointed. Seats in the gallery, which was above the balcony, were backless wooden benches. And in this newspaper from 1911, you can see the 2 competitors are the only entertainment on the page, the Majestic Theater and the City Opera House. I would imagine there was a tinge of excitement in the town. I mean, all they had in town at the time was the Opera House. The Harder Opera House had gone out of business, the Bijou Theater had gone out of business, and so now they've got a new competitor in the Majestic Theater. 2 places to go, 2 choices to see the stage plays of the day, and I imagine it was a pretty exciting time. And you can see in this front page of the Daily Herald the article that was written about the opening. The play is the thing. My friend Bill Shakespeare would say, now that you have the new theater, patronize it. Macklin Arbuckle. Well, it looks like a picture of a lady, but it's actually a man who was an actor that played in the very first play at the Majestic Theater. I'm going to scroll through this pretty fast, but you can pause it and read it yourself. Opening of new theater was an auspicious one, just a $2 word for successful. Society folk of Port Huron turned out in goodly numbers and christened the Majestic. Not a single hitch marred the production, and clock-like regularity marked the first performance. A monument to progressiveness of Port Huron, when Macklin Arbuckle was called before the footlights of the new Majestic Theater Friday night, and graciously responded to a curtain call with the above words, he struck a responsive chord in the hearts of Port Huron theater goers. He goes on to talk about the play and about the staff, the manager, and so forth, and a little bit about the theater. It says, the new Majestic is a modest playhouse but has all the modern improvements. The seating capacity is 1,500, which is divided as follows. The parquet, 500, balcony, 450, and gallery, 550. The entire width of the stage is 75 feet, and the depth is 32 feet. There are 15 exits in the theater, and fire escapes leading from both the gallery and the balcony. This was a big deal back then because of all the fires that happened in theaters, so I'm sure it reassured the customers. Something else about the theater that's not in this article. Backstage, there was 14 dressing rooms, and the stage, as well as the rest of the theater, was lighted by electricity, not by gas like the 30-year-old Opera House. The name of the play was The County Chairman, starring Macklin Arbuckle, and the stage play would later be made into a film that would also be shown at the Majestic Theater. And here's a couple of screenshots from that film. I've never watched an Arbuckle movie, but I imagine in my mind that he was a lot like Jackie Gleason. The Majestic Theater had some big plays that came to it, course, many of the plays we wouldn't recognize today, but back then they were a pretty big deal. And one of those plays was 45 Minutes from Broadway. It was a musical by George Cohan. You probably won't recognize any music from this play, but I think you'll recognize some of his work that he did later on. For example, in World War I, he did this one, Over There. He wrote Yankee Doodle Boy in 1904, 2 years before the Majestic opened. It's a patriotic song from the Broadway musical Little Johnny Jones and written by George Cohan. The play concerns the trials and tribulations of a fictional American jockey, Johnny Jones, but it was based on real-life jockey Todd Sloan, who rides a horse named Yankee Doodle in the English Derby. So if you ever wonder what Yankee Doodle meant, it's the name of a horse. Still don't recognize it? Well, it's also known by the name Yankee Doodle Dandy. In 1942, there was also a movie by the same name with James Cagney. Another song you'll probably recognize that came from the same stage play in 1904, Little Johnny Jones, the same one Yankee Doodle Dandy came from, was Give My Regards to Broadway. But most folks of my age group will remember it from the movie Give My Regards to Broadway with Dan Dailey. So 45 Minutes from Broadway was a pretty big deal. The newspaper gave it a full page and talked about the movie, about the actors. I'm not going to go all through that, but you might enjoy looking at some of the scenes from it. And while we're doing that, I'll play a little clip, audio clip of the music that was from that program. Stage plays weren't the only thing that were featured at the Majestic Theater. On occasion, they had an opera or two. Here you can see an ad for Madame Butterfly. And every once in a while, they would feature a famous musician. Here we see Regal, a famous Hungarian violinist. On occasion, outside sources would sponsor something like boxing matches, which was sponsored by the Elks Club. In the early days, it wasn't like it is today when you went to the theater. You couldn't just wear whatever you have on. You dressed to the nines. It was a chance to show off. And the ladies especially liked that. And they would pick out their favorite hat, which was usually a large hat, and be very comfortable sitting inside the theater. Of course, the people behind them weren't too comfortable because they couldn't see over the hat. The men knew enough to take their hats off. So something had to be done, and someone very smart came up with the idea, we'll make theater hats for the ladies. And so they did. They called them theater caps. They could still be fancy, they just weren't so big. There's much more on the Majestic Theater, and we'll finish it in our next video, so join me then.